Our text for this Palm Sunday from Mark chapter 11. We'll hear a little bit from Zechariah chapter 9 as well. If you are able today to stand before Jesus face to face, what question, if you could only have one question, what question would you ask of him? You stand before Jesus this very day. You get one question. What question would you ask of Jesus Christ? As interesting and as intriguing as that might be, there's something even more intriguing, more interesting, more vitally important. It's this. If you were to stand before Jesus today, what question do you think he would ask of you? What question would Jesus ask you this very day? Now, Jesus asks lots of questions when he was speaking and teaching and engaging with people. One day he was walking along the road with his disciples and he stopped them and he said, "Who do the people say that I am?" And they said, "Well, some people say you're John the Baptist come back to life, and others the prophet Elijah, and others one of the other prophets of old." And then Jesus stopped, he turned to them, looked at them, and he said, "Well, what about you? Who do you say that I am? Who do you believe me to be?" There is no more vital and important question in all of the earth than what we believe and confess Jesus to be. Jesus would turn to you today and he would say, "Who do you say that I am?" And it is this question which Palm Sunday is all about. This triumphal entry of Jesus into the city of Jerusalem, riding upon that donkey with the thousands of people surrounding him, shouting Hosanna. Jesus is orchestrating this entire moment to answer that precise question. Who do you say that I am? Now, 500 years before the time of Jesus, there was a prophet named Zechariah. This is the time when God's people, if you know the story, when the Israelites and the Jewish people were in captivity in Babylon for over 70 years, and they've just made their way 1,700 miles from Babylon to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is destroyed. They're rebuilding the walls. The temple is destroyed. They're rebuilding the temple. And it was a time of great fear, of great uncertainty. God, are you still with us? God, are you still for us? God, all those promises that you made, are they going to come true? Where are you, God? And into that time of uncertainty, God sends the prophet Zechariah with these beautiful words of hope. And again, this is what Zechariah said. We heard this a few moments ago from Pastor Micah. "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. Righteous and having salvation is he, humble and mounted on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey." And then it says, "He shall speak peace to the nations, to the ethnos, to the not just Jewish people, but to the Gentiles, to the whole world. His rule shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth." That this isn't just some earthly king who's coming. This isn't just the king of the Jewish people or the king of Israel. This is the king of the entire world, the king of all creation, and his rule will be to the ends of the earth. This echoes what God had said to King David 1,000 years before the time of Jesus, and a covenant and a promise he made to David, saying that I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be to him a father, he shall be to me a son. This is not merely Solomon or some earthly king that was the descendant of King David. This is one whose kingdom will be established. How long? Forever. For all eternity. I will be to him a father. He shall be my son. This is the very Son of the Most High God. God himself returning to this world, to put this world to rights, to make this world what we long for it to be, the King, the King. And this is what Jesus knows. This is the promises that God's people know, and they have been waiting and waiting. 500 years since the time of the prophet Zechariah, 1,000 years since this promise was made to King David. And Jesus here in Mark chapter 11 says that they drew near to Jerusalem. The moment that God's people had been waiting for has arrived. Jerusalem, we estimate, by we I mean people way smarter than me, archaeologists and students of culture, estimate that Jerusalem was around 30 to 40,000 in population at this time. 30,000 to 40,000 people. But this is the great celebration of what? The Passover. And during the Passover, the city of Jerusalem would swell 20 times, 25 times more. There could be 500,000 or 800,000, maybe even 1 million. The Jewish historian Josephus said 2 million people would arrive in Jerusalem for the Passover. You can just imagine this city was filled with people, overflowing with people, all of the homes, all of the houses. This was a volatile situation. The Roman authorities, the Roman government, and those soldiers, they were trying to keep everything under control. The Romans liked to keep things under control. The religious leaders, wanting to please the Romans, wanted things to remain under control with these thousands and thousands, if not 1 million people there in Jerusalem. And here comes Jesus. And he's about to do something that is going to cause a potentially volatile situation. This is bold. This is orchestrated. This is planned. Look at the details here. He says, go into the village in front of you, and immediately as you enter it, you will find a colt, a donkey tied, on which no one has ever sat. Untie it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, why are you doing this? Say, the Lord has need of it, and will send it back here immediately. Jesus has planned this. Jesus is being methodical. This is all going according to his plans and purposes. They get this donkey. They bring it back to Jesus. And it says they brought it to Jesus, threw their cloaks on it, and Jesus then sits down on this colt, on this donkey, and begins to ride into Jerusalem. The people, can you see this? There are thousands before him, thousands behind him, and they are losing their minds. This is the day, this is the moment. Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the coming kingdom of our father David. Hosanna in the highest. Waving palm branches, throwing their cloaks upon the ground as Jesus rides into Jerusalem as king. What is Jesus doing? He is purposefully and very intentionally fulfilling the prophecy that Zechariah had made 500 years ago and accomplishing the promise made to David 1,000 years before. Jesus is riding into Jerusalem not just as an earthly king who's going to reign or rule for 50 years, throw out the Romans, which is what the people wanted. Jesus is riding into Jerusalem as the king of the world, as the king of all creation, as the Son of God, as God himself in this world, riding into Jerusalem. Jesus would turn to you and he would say, "Who do you say that I am? Who do you believe me to be?" And I think most people in 21st century Western culture, America today, most people, look, a lot of people don't like the church or a lot of people don't like Christianity. I think most everyone likes Jesus. It's hard to find someone who's, I got a real problem with that Jesus guy. You know, most people respect him on some level. If you were to go around and ask your neighbors or coworkers or people in your schools, who do you think Jesus is? The most likely answer is, I think he was a wonderful man. I think he was an inspirational teacher. He was a great religious leader, one in a long line. I mean, there was Moses, there was Abraham, and there's Moses, and there's Jesus, and there's Muhammad, and there's Buddha, and he's one of a long line of wonderful religious leaders. He's an inspiration. What a great example. He wants us to love one another, even love our enemies. That's what Jesus was all about. Palm Sunday doesn't let us say that. The triumphal entry of Christ into Jerusalem doesn't let us say that. I mean, think about me. I know what most of you are thinking. You are thinking, Pastor Abel is the greatest pastor in the history of all humanity. You're thinking that. Some of you might think I'm okay. I'm an okay pastor and I'm an okay preacher. I'm a pretty good teacher and a pretty decent spiritual leader of this congregation. But imagine if the primary central message of what I taught, of what I preached, and of what we were about here at Our Father was that I was the Son of God. That my message for you on this Palm Sunday is that I am the King of the world. I'm the King of the universe. Bow down and worship me and follow me. If that's what I was teaching today, what would you think of me? You would think either I was evil and a manipulator and a liar, or most likely, if I was going around saying I was the Son of God and the King of the world and I believed it, you would think that I had lost my mind, that I was truly insane, a megalomaniac. This is precisely what Jesus taught about himself and what he's showing us in this triumphal entry. So we cannot say, well, he's very inspirational, he was a wonderful guy, he's a wonderful... What he taught was that he was the Son of God and the King of glory. God himself. So we have to say either Jesus was a liar and evil and just manipulating the people, or Jesus himself was a megalomaniac and an insane man, mentally unstable, or that he was exactly who he claimed to be, the Son of God, the King that our hearts long for. But we can't just stay in the middle and say, oh, he was nice. He was an evil liar, or he was a crazy man and a megalomaniac, or he was indeed the King of glory, God himself. Jesus would ask you, who do you believe me to be? Who do you say? Who do you confess and say that I am? And as we begin to wrap up here, I want us to see just what kind of king Jesus was and is. Because there's something here at the very end of our text from Mark 11, in verse 11, that I think we can miss. It's helpful to know a little Greek grammar. Verse 11 says this: after this amazing triumphal entry, Hosanna, Hosanna. It says that Jesus entered Jerusalem and went into the temple. And when he had looked around at everything, as it was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. It seems kind of anticlimactic. I mean, here we have this huge story, and he's riding in, and thousands of people, and he's the King of glory, and here he is, and Hosanna. And then he goes, he looks around the temple, and okay, it's getting late, and he goes back home. What is important here is it says he looked around at everything in the temple. Again, Greek grammar is helpful. He looked around at everything, and I promise you this is important. He looked around at everything. This is what is called, it's in the middle voice. Some of you maybe are familiar. There's the active voice, which is the subject of the sentence is doing the action. There's the passive voice, where the subject of the sentence is having the action done to them. And then the middle voice, here in Greek, is sort of a weird combination of both of those, where the person, the subject of the sentence, is doing the action, but the action that they are doing is having an effect on them. I wrote this down to get it technically correct. The middle voice in Greek, isn't this fascinating, the grammar that you're learning? The middle voice in Greek is used mainly to imply that the subject benefits or suffers directly from the action expressed by the verb. Benefits or suffers. When it says that Jesus looked around at everything in the temple, the middle voice, it is saying he looked around at everything in the temple and it was affecting him. It was disturbing him. What he saw, what was happening in the temple, was deeply distressing and affecting the heart of the Son of God. We see into the very heart of God here. What did Jesus see when he entered into the temple? Well, when he went through those main gates, the first thing he would have seen is what's called the court of the Gentiles. That's the space on the right and the left. And the court of the Gentiles, if you were not Jewish, that's where you went. That's as close as you could possibly get to God, the closest you could possibly get to salvation, to intimacy. Now remember what's happening when Jesus goes into the temple. It is the celebration of what? Passover. And again, a city of 30 or 40,000 is now maybe as many as 1 million people. And there are thousands and thousands of people crammed into the temple and into the courtyard of the Gentiles. And remember what's happening. There are thousands of people who are buying and selling. There's hundreds of tables and booths where they're selling lambs and animals for sacrifices. There's hundreds of tables where there's money changing going on, all this foreign currency from around the Roman Empire. Again, the Jewish historian Josephus said that one Passover there was 250,000 lambs that were sold and were slaughtered at the temple. If you've ever seen images or pictures or video of the New York Stock Exchange and everyone is buying and selling and it's craziness, this is what Jesus sees. And it disturbs him. It angers him. And perhaps you remember what happened the next day. It says Jesus the next day came back to the temple. He entered the temple and he began to drive out those who sold and those who bought in the temple. And he overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold pigeons. And he wouldn't allow anyone to carry anything through the temple. I mean, he has got this command of this situation, and he is enraged, righteous anger, and he's throwing over tables, and he's knocking things over, and he's driving people out. And he says, is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all the nations, but you've made it into a den of robbers and thieves and manipulators, and this is empty religion. It was supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, for the ethnos, for Jews and Gentiles, for all people. And you think you're so close to God through all of this religious activity, and yet you are so far away, and you do not realize it. Can you see? We think of Jesus with his Birkenstocks, and he's just this, and he's turning over the tables, and he's driving people out of the temple. And it is righteous anger. But anger is not the opposite of love. The opposite of love is indifference. And Jesus, as your King, is not indifferent when it comes to you, when it comes to his people. He is passionate. This anger comes because he loves so much. He's not going to be indifferent. He will do whatever it takes. This is the passion, the love that drives Jesus later on in that week. There in the upper room with his disciples, he takes water, he pours it into a bowl, and he gets down on his hands and his knees, and he washes the feet of his disciple. In that society, that was a position lower than a slave. Not even a slave was made to wash someone's feet. This is the King of glory, the King of creation, God in human flesh, on his hands and knees, washing their feet. It's this passion, it's this love, which is why he allows himself then to be betrayed and arrested and put on trial and beaten and mocked and spit on and scourged and nailed to a cross. Crucifixion was the punishment for the lowest of the lows in Roman society, for the slaves. This is the King that we have, who made himself nothing to give you everything, who dies so that you might live. This is what Jesus wants you to know today, that he loves you more than you could ever possibly know. Is there any greater testimony to the dignity of human life and the value of human life than the cross of our King Jesus Christ? This is how much you matter to him. This is how much you are worth, that he would give it all away for you, so that today you might know you are loved, you're his, you're forgiven. Jesus is your brother, Jesus is your best friend, Jesus is your Savior, and Jesus is your King. Jesus would turn to you today and say, who do you believe? Who do you say that I am? To Christ alone be all the glory. Amen.